Today let's take a deep dive for the first rainbow submarine in-game, I-404. And spoiler alert, she's not the best with a triple IJN submarines. But first, a sneak peek at how strong she is. New gold ships catch up to or overtake old rainbow ships, so how well will I-404 stand the test of time? For example, ignoring the rainbow bullion here, we have Yudachi, who's worse than a lot of gold ships now, and at the bottom end of cruisers, we also have Drake and Azuma. So how far above the gold submarines is I-404? The answer is very. There's a huge gap between I-404 and the gold submarines. First of all, she has monstrous stats. The highest or nearly highest oxygen, reload, hit, aviation, and HP of all submarines, and HP is the highest of all submarines by a lot. She has the highest torpedo efficiencies as well, and combines features from various subs. For example, you can summon the submarine fleet from out of range once per sortie. She can launch seaplanes like I-13, and she does 3 strikes, while I-13 does 2 strikes. She surfaces near the beginning of the battle like Amahara and U-552 do. And this is usually good because 3 seconds of surface time effectively equals plus 60 oxygen. However, I-404's damage reduction does not apply for the first time she surfaces for 3 seconds, and she also doesn't fire her all-out assault. Because she has such high HP, 404 will generally be fine, but unlucky timing with one of these fighters or a carpet bomber can vaporize her HP. And if that happens, you'll have to restart the battle and change the time you summon the subs at. She also gives 10% crit rate for all subs, which is about a 4% damage buff for the sub fleet, including herself. Another 10% torp stat for all IJN subs. It does apply to herself as well. Plus, she has cross-fleet effects, and these apply to all battles regardless of the hunting range or summon subs, as long as she's in the sortie itself. And that includes 10% hit for the surface fleet, which is about 2% to 4% more damage depending on the ship and enemy. And a carpet bombing 15 seconds after the battle starts. It does very little damage, but it does make the enemies take 5% more damage for 10 seconds. And that's good for the first salvo of the main fleet, and also for other cross-fleet barrages like New Jersey's. One thing to note is that 1/3 of her damage doesn't care about her location, since they're aimed from airplanes for example, which makes her still pretty good when she's off flag. So overall she does like 50% more personal damage than the next highest submarines like Flasher and Amahara, which makes her a great asset to any submarine fleet. It breaks apart the fish pack, it breaks apart wolf pack. You can insert her in any fleet and that fleet will be improved. Now, personal damage calculations. I-404 is very unique in that she can reach 4 salvos of G7E, while other submarines can only hit 3 salvos for 24 total torps. She can do 4 salvos for up to 32 torps, but that requires very high reload. The alternative is to just pull her back to 3 salvos of G7E by using the Oxy-torp instead of Snorkel, and the theoretical damage is still close enough. So overall, again, 50% more damage than Flasher and Amahara, and this is against a pretty high anti-air boss. I think about 1/4 of I-404's damage is aviation damage, which means that it'll do more against enemies with lower anti-air stat. For these top 2 rows, I assume that she fires 30 G7Es out of the 32 maximum total, and 80% of them hit. While for bidders, I assume they fire all 24, and 75% of them hit. Everything about submarines revolves around 404 now, so I-404 at the top, and her pack at the top. I just pulled these 6s and 7s out of my ass because I didn't set any thresholds ever, but now I'll wait and see how future subs go. Here's the usual worth slide. So is she worth obtaining? Is not even a question, she's free, just play the game. Is she worth using or leveling up for new players? Although she's lower priority for UR Bullions, you can still use her without max limit break. It's free to throw her in any sub-fleet and get the cross-fleet barrage. For veteran players, if you care about her tech but not herself for some reason, she already gives 1 torp at obtain, and leveling her up to 120 only gives +2 aviation, which is only useful for herself or I-13. But if you do care about her, using her in a hard content, well, now she's the most meta of meta subs for any meta sub fleet, but submarines can't be used in meta showdown. But anyway, she'll still be useful in campaign if you haven't cleared it yet, or in challenge mode, or in hard arbiter to go for those speedrun 1 strikes. For example gear setups, first row is type 95 Kai, if you know, then you know. Second row requires very high reload, or being in Operation Siren to get the 20 oxygen from steel and Edelweiss. Although the oath is not necessary, it does give another 7 reload, and the more reload you have, the more likely you are to finish 32 G7Es. So the third loadout is what I recommend for most players. You don't have to care too much about reload. You can use your average cats. And if you don't even have average cats, then you can still go with Bitter, which has a lower reload requirement than G7E. Plus, if you haven't started PR7 or are gated by Protocore purchases, then the Seiran can be a replacement for the Bearcat. Although even with the Seiran's 60% extra damage on an SSV, the Bearcat still beats it on all armor types. This is I-404's best fleet, but is it an I-404 pack or is it a fish pack? Submarine positions are important. These are numbered 1, 2, 3. So 1 Flasher is in the middle, 2 Archerfish on the top, and 3 I-404 is on the bottom. The top is usually the worst position, which means you put your lowest damage sub there, so it's especially useful if that lowest damage sub also happens to buff one of your other subs, and that's what Archerfish does. But against light armor, you should replace Archerfish with Amity, Amahara, or Albacore. A triple IJN faction fleet is decent, but it's held back by I-19, who doesn't beat Flasher even while being buffed by both of the other two, and she also needs the flagship position. I-58, however, is much easier to use, purple sub by the way, the starter sub even. You can just leave her in the top position forever, she'll do less damage but buff I-404. Really, it's just add I-404 to your fleet, and then pick 2 other decent subs to go with her. She doesn't really need the flagship position, you can leave her on the bottom. The best options are Flasher, and then Archerfish, Amahara, or Albacore, or for light bosses only, Amity or any other Tempesta. Then we have the Italians and the Japanese, and finally the Wolves. Wolves lose a lot of damage by only having 2 Wolves in the fleet, but 404 is still better than having a 3rd Wolf. This has been a deep dive, and I hope you found it useful.